The laughter from the grand ballroom echoed down the corridor like a cruel reminder. Linda Matthews stood quietly, clutching the shawl around her shoulders, her heels still damp from the rain outside. She wasn't supposed to be standing here, alone, outside the very wedding she paid for. But that's exactly where she found herself. Locked out. Through the open slit of the door, she could see her daughter, Rachel, radiant in her wedding gown, laughing with her father, Linda's ex-husband, Mark, and his new, much younger wife. They were at the head table. Center stage. Linda's name wasn't even printed on the seating chart. She had written the checks. Chosen the venue. Spent months stitching lace into Rachel's veil by hand. And yet, she was treated like an obligation. A ghost. A server nearly bumped into her in the hallway. "Ma'am, you shouldn't be back here," he said, looking past her. "Are you with the cleanup crew?" Linda looked at him, her lips parted slightly, but no words came. Only silence. He disappeared before she could respond. Her hand trembled slightly as she pulled her phone from her purse. First call. "Hi, yes. This is Linda Matthews. Cancel the remaining catering service immediately. No more trays delivered. Do not continue dessert." A pause. "Yes, I'm the one paying. Yes, I'm absolutely sure." Second call. "This is Linda. Shut down the lighting and sound. The event is over." She ended the call and looked down the corridor once more. The music inside dimmed and then, cut out completely. Lights flickered. Confused murmurs rose. She heard someone shout, "Is this part of the program?" The cake remained untouched. The violinist stopped mid-note. A hush fell across the crowd. From her spot in the hallway, Linda saw Rachel stand up abruptly, panic on her face. Her eyes darted across the room. "Where's Mom?" she asked aloud. One guest whispered, "I think she left." Another murmured, "I didn't even see her during the ceremony." Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line as she made her way toward the entrance, wedding dress trailing behind her like a wave of white guilt. She flung open the door, and there stood Linda. "What did you do?" Rachel demanded, her voice sharp, trembling. Linda didn't flinch. Her voice was calm, clear. "I paid for everything," she said. "And now I've taken everything back." Rachel blinked, stunned. Linda stepped past her, back straight, face unreadable. "I raised you alone," she added softly. "But tonight? You chose to erase me." She walked into the cool night air as Rachel stood in the doorway, frozen between pride and regret, with a silent ballroom behind her, and a wedding unraveling by the second. Linda sat on the edge of her neatly made bed that morning, smoothing out a wrinkle in her pale blue dress. It wasn't the dress she had imagined wearing to her daughter's wedding. That dress, the one she'd spent months picking out, had been quietly dismissed by Rachel weeks ago. "It's too outdated, Mom," her daughter had said, laughing. "This wedding's going to be modern, elegant, curated." As if Linda didn't belong in the picture anymore. She had swallowed the comment with a smile, just like she had swallowed so many others over the past few months. At first, Linda believed it was just wedding stress. Rachel was getting married, after all. Tensions run high, emotions fly loose. But as the months passed, she realized it wasn't just stress, it was something deeper. A growing distance. A coldness she hadn't seen coming. Linda remembered raising Rachel alone after Mark left them for a woman barely older than their daughter. She had worked double shifts as a school principal, graded papers until her hands cramped, and still made sure Rachel had a warm breakfast every morning. She missed her own dreams, her own needs, just to make sure Rachel's life wasn't missing anything. When Rachel got engaged, Linda had been thrilled. She wrote the first check without hesitation: venue, dress, flowers, photography. It was her way of giving her daughter the fairy tale she never had. But as vendors were hired and decisions made, Linda found herself pushed to the sidelines. Meetings happened without her. Choices were finalized behind her back. And when she voiced a gentle opinion, Rachel brushed her off like a stubborn leaf on her sleeve. "It's our wedding," Rachel said once, referring to herself and Mark. Linda's breath caught. "Your father and I have it covered." Your father. The man who walked out on them. Linda smiled politely then, hiding the sting behind her composed face. But that moment, those words, stayed. The final blow came 2 nights before the wedding. Linda had offered to host the rehearsal dinner at her home. She had already prepared the menu, even folded cloth napkins into tiny roses. That's when Rachel called. Hey Mom, so, we're doing the dinner at Dad's country club instead. It's just, it fits the aesthetic better, you know? Aesthetic. Linda had no words. Just nodded into the phone, gripping the edge of her kitchen counter to keep from shaking. That night, she sat alone, candles lit, food untouched. The napkins stared back at her like wilted flowers. Now, standing outside the locked ballroom door on her daughter's big day, it all made sense. She wasn't needed. Not in the pictures. Not at the table. Not even in the room. But what Rachel didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that Linda wasn't the helpless, discarded woman they thought she was. She hadn't fought her whole life to be forgotten. And she was done staying silent. Linda sat in her car after being locked out of the ballroom, her hands resting on the steering wheel, unmoving. Her fingers trembled, not from age, but from something heavier, disappointment layered over years of emotional sacrifice. She stared blankly at the building, hearing muffled music and laughter seep through the walls, as if mocking her presence on the other side. Her daughter was getting married, and she was outside. Alone. The betrayal wasn't just about the door. That door represented years of love, struggle, and unwavering loyalty that now seemed disposable. She could still remember Rachel's first fever when she was 3. Mark was already halfway gone by then, staying late at work, sleeping in the guest room. It was Linda who stayed up all night, holding their daughter's hand, praying for the fever to break. She thought of the time Rachel got into her dream college. Linda had cried in the parking lot after work when she got the news. Not tears of sadness, but of pride and relief. She had worked 3 extra years just to afford the tuition. Mark hadn't even answered the phone when she called to share the good news. Yet here they were, all smiling beside him. Toasting him. Celebrating him. Like he had been the anchor of their lives. Linda thought she'd prepared herself for the wedding. The way she'd been slowly excluded from everything was painful, yes, but she had told herself that it was Rachel's day. Not hers. She had justified every slight, every cold shoulder, every decision made without her. But being locked out, not even informed or acknowledged, that shattered something inside her that could never be pieced back together. What hurt the most wasn't that she wasn't appreciated, it was that she had been completely erased. Like a chapter torn out of a book. The one woman who had stitched together Rachel's childhood, who had sacrificed promotions, relationships, even her own happiness just to give her daughter everything, was no longer even worth a phone call. Linda had allowed it all. Smiled through it. Believed that her love was enough. But as she sat in that car, mascara clinging to the corners of her eyes, she realized, love without respect is just a beautiful kind of prison. She thought of the checkbook still sitting in her purse. The payments made, the vendors booked under her name, the contracts she had personally signed. They had all been so eager to work with the woman funding the Matthews wedding. And suddenly, Linda stopped trembling. She sat up straighter. Because for the first time in a long time, she remembered exactly who she was, not just a mother, not just someone's ex-wife, but Linda Matthews. The woman who had built a life out of ashes. The woman who knew every detail of this wedding because she was the one who made it happen. They had locked her out, thinking she was powerless. But they forgot, Linda held the key to everything. And she was about to remind them. Linda's fingers moved swiftly across her phone screen, each tap filled with quiet fury and measured resolve. She wasn't going to scream, cry, or beg. No, this time, she would handle things like the woman she had always been, calm, composed, and in control. She pulled up her email. Every single vendor, from the elegant caterer to the floral designer, DJ, ballet company, even the photographer, was listed under her name. Not Rachel's. Not Mark's. Hers. Every invoice had her signature. Every payment had come from her account. Because Rachel hadn't lifted a finger to pay for anything. She had assumed, just like everyone else, that Linda would silently handle it all and fade into the background. Not anymore. She opened the caterer's contract first. Full payment required 24 hours before event, it read. Linda had only paid the deposit. She hit reply, effective immediately, please cancel all services for today's event. Per contract terms, I accept forfeiture of the deposit. One by one, she did the same with the rest. Florals to be removed from premises immediately, final balance not authorized. Photography for the Matthews event is cancelled. No release to be granted for any captured material. Entertainment services not approved for final payment, cancel DJ and lighting immediately. With each message sent, Linda felt a little more like herself again. Not the woman who had been left out, dismissed, and disrespected, but the woman who had survived single motherhood, who had built a home from the ground up, and who had funded this entire farce of a wedding. She called the event coordinator last. Hi, Linda Matthews here. Just wanted to confirm that the balance due for the venue hasn't been processed yet? That's correct, the young woman on the other end said cheerfully. We usually process it halfway through the event. Perfect, Linda replied. Please don't. I'm canceling all further payments effective immediately. I'm not authorizing anything else under my name. In fact, I'll be contacting my bank in the next hour to make sure nothing goes through without my consent. Oh, the coordinator paused. Should I let the party know? No, Linda said with a smile that no one could see. Let them find out themselves. She ended the call and leaned back in her seat. Her heart was steady now. Not because she was happy to ruin her daughter's big day, but because sometimes, consequences are the only language people understand. Linda didn't act out of pettiness, this wasn't revenge. This was clarity. After being ignored, excluded, and disrespected, she was simply reclaiming what was hers. She wasn't going to finance a celebration where she wasn't welcome. Let them figure it out when the food stops arriving. When the flowers disappear. When the lights cut off and the DJ falls silent. Let them scramble. She didn't need to make a scene. Reality would do it for her. The ballroom was glowing with golden lights, filled with laughter, camera flashes, and champagne glasses clinking. Rachel was radiant in her gown, gliding from table to table like royalty, her hand locked with her new husband's. Mark stood proudly at the front, giving speeches, patting backs, acting as if this night had his fingerprints all over it. Then, slowly, things started to change. First, the waiters vanished. One by one, the servers began to disappear from the floor, their trays unfinished, glasses half-filled. Guests looked around confused, many thinking it was just a break between courses. But as the minutes stretched longer, the confusion started to shift into murmurs. Next, the music stopped mid-song. The DJ stood behind his booth, shrugging toward the wedding planner who frantically tapped on her headset, whispering into the mic and looking around like she'd just been told a fire had broken out. But there was no fire. Just silence. An awkward, heavy silence that no one could explain. The floral arrangements began to get wheeled out. Literally. Two men in plain clothes rolled carts through the side entrance, carefully removing centerpieces and bridal decor right off the tables. One of the guests tried to stop them, but they handed over a copy of the invoice, unpaid. Per terms, we're reclaiming materials, the man said with all the emotion of a parking meter. Rachel's smile faltered. She whispered something to Mark, who immediately stepped aside and dialed his phone. No answer. He called again. Then again. On the fourth attempt, he cursed under his breath and stormed toward the exit. In the middle of this chaos, the lights dimmed once, then flickered, then shut off completely, leaving only the dim glow of a few chandeliers that ran on backup power. People gasped. One older guest stumbled. Someone knocked over a wine glass. The DJ grabbed the mic and said, "Sorry folks, looks like we've hit some technical issues. Hang tight." But no one was hanging tight. The guests were now buzzing. Some began leaving. Others sat awkwardly, fanning themselves or checking their phones. What had once been a perfect wedding was now unraveling like an old ribbon. Rachel rushed to the event coordinator, her voice shrill, face flushed. What the hell is going on? "I've been trying to reach your mom," the coordinator said nervously. "She pulled all the payments. I was told not to proceed with anything else without her approval." Mark came stomping back in, red-faced and angry. "She cancelled it all. Everything was under her name. The venue, the vendors, she shut it all down." Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She finally got it. Linda hadn't stormed in shouting. She hadn't made a scene. She simply walked away and took everything with her. Because it was never Mark's wedding. It wasn't Rachel's either. It had always been Linda's gift to them. And now that gift was gone. Linda sat in the back of a quiet cafe, 2 blocks away from the venue, sipping a warm cup of chamomile tea. She wasn't dressed in anything fancy, just her favorite navy sweater and slacks, but she looked more composed and powerful than any bride or groom in that ballroom ever could. Her phone buzzed non-stop on the table beside her, but she didn't flinch. She just let it ring. She had no intention of answering, not tonight. The messages were flooding in. Rachel. Mark. Even relatives who had once sided with her daughter, calling Linda dramatic or too emotional, were now sending confused, desperate texts. What's going on? Why did the vendors leave? Where are you? Rachel's crying. Linda looked out the window, watching as dusk settled over the city. The sky was painted in hues of orange and purple, peaceful and slow-moving, just like her heart in that moment. She felt no guilt, no sadness, only clarity. She had spent decades putting her daughter first. Every school recital, every scraped knee, every tearful teenage meltdown. She had worked double shifts to pay for college, skipped vacations, and went without luxuries so Rachel could have the best of everything. And now, she had watched that same daughter lock her out of her wedding, physically, emotionally, and publicly. They hadn't just hurt her feelings. They had erased her from the most important moment of a family's life. But they'd made one fatal mistake. They forgot who paid the bills. Linda wasn't a rich woman, not by any stretch. But what she had, she gave. Willingly. Lovingly. And when that love was taken for granted, turned into an expectation instead of a gift, she decided to pull it all back. Not to punish, but to protect her own worth. It felt like a weight lifting. For the first time in years, Linda wasn't trying to please anyone. She wasn't trying to hold a family together that didn't care to include her. She was free. The door of the cafe jingled softly as a familiar face stepped in, her best friend, Carol. She'd been with Linda through everything, the divorce, the late nights, the silent heartbreaks. Carol slid into the seat across from her, eyes wide. "Well," Carol said slowly, words out. Linda smiled gently. "Let them talk. They're saying the wedding collapsed. That the groom tried to bargain with the venue and got kicked out. And that Rachel had a meltdown." Linda nodded, calm as ever. "Good. Maybe they'll learn." Carol raised her mug. "To finally choosing yourself." Linda clinked her glass gently. "To no longer financing my own disrespect." They sat in peaceful silence, 2 older women who had seen the world shift beneath their feet and still stood tall. Outside, people were still rushing to clean up the mess Rachel and Mark had made, but Linda? She was done cleaning up for others. From now on, she'd spend her time, her money, and her love only on those who truly earned it. Long after Carol left and the city lights began to dim, Linda sat alone, her empty teacup in hand, and drifted back through the decades, moments tucked away like folded letters in an old drawer. She remembered Rachel's birth. A cold winter morning, her fingers numb from gripping the hospital bedsheets as she brought her only child into the world. She remembered the nurse placing Rachel in her arms, tiny, fragile, and full of life. That moment had changed everything. From that day on, Linda's world revolved around making sure Rachel had the life Linda never did. She had grown up with very little. Her own mother was distant, her father stern and mostly absent. Love wasn't spoken, it had to be earned through silence, obedience, or sacrifice. Linda learned early to never ask for too much. And so, when she had Rachel, she vowed to break the cycle. She promised herself her daughter would never feel unwanted, never feel like she had to earn love. And she kept that promise. Linda put Rachel through dance classes, piano lessons, private tutoring. When her ex-husband walked out, Linda didn't even cry in front of Rachel. She got 2 jobs instead. She smiled through her exhaustion, hid past due bills behind refrigerator magnets, and told Rachel she could be anything she wanted. But somewhere along the way, Rachel started to expect more, and appreciate less. Linda tried to ignore the signs, how Rachel never called unless she needed something, how thank you had become rare, how Mark slowly took control of every decision, treating Linda like a background character in her own family. Still, Linda smiled. She thought love meant staying quiet. Then came the wedding. The event Linda had dreamed of attending with pride became the day they locked her out. Not just of the building, but of Rachel's heart. That door slamming in her face wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. After years of selfless love, Rachel had shown her mother exactly where she stood. And that was when something inside Linda shifted. She realized love wasn't supposed to feel like this. Love wasn't about being walked on, funding someone's big day only to be erased from it. It wasn't about being the silent sponsor behind someone else's show. Love, true love, was mutual, respectful, and rooted in gratitude. Linda wiped away a quiet tear. Not one of sadness, but release. She wasn't bitter. She was awake. And she was finally seeing things clearly, maybe for the first time in her life. The past had shaped her, but it would no longer define her future. She'd loved deeply, given everything, and still had the courage to walk away when respect disappeared. That wasn't failure. That was strength. That was freedom. 3 days later, the dust from the ruined wedding still lingered in the town like the faint smell of burnt candles after a storm. Everyone had heard. Everyone had questions. But Linda? She wasn't hiding. She walked into the local market with her head high and a soft smile resting on her lips. People stared, whispered, some even gasped. But no one said a word to her directly. Except Mrs. Daly, the sweet, older woman who ran the florist shop. She looked at Linda and gave her a gentle nod. Sometimes the only way to teach them is to let them fall. Linda smiled back, placing a hand over her heart. It was time. She didn't go back home immediately. Instead, she took a long, quiet walk through the park she used to take Rachel to when she was a little girl. The benches were still the same, the swings creaked the same way, but Linda had changed. She wasn't the exhausted, desperate for approval mother anymore. She sat on a bench near the lake, watching the breeze ripple over the surface like a fresh start, and pulled out her phone. This time, she opened the messages, not to respond, but to read and release. Rachel, I didn't know you felt so left out. Mark, you've embarrassed the entire family. Congratulations. Rachel again, Mom, please. Can we talk? Linda read them all. And then, calmly, without a single ounce of hate, she deleted every one. She didn't need an apology to validate her pain. She didn't need Rachel to suddenly become the daughter she once imagined. And she certainly didn't need Mark's approval, whose love came with strings tied to his own ego. What Linda needed was already hers. Peace. Dignity. Self-respect. The truth was, the wedding didn't fall apart because of Linda. It fell apart because it had been built on the shaky foundation of entitlement and disrespect. All she did was pull back the curtain. They expected her silence. They expected her compliance. But instead, she gave them a lesson. One they'd never forget. As she stood to leave, she felt lighter than she had in years. Her heart wasn't heavy anymore. Her back stood straighter. She had let go of guilt, of fear, of the exhausting hope that someday they'd appreciate her. Some bridges don't need to be burned. Some just need to be walked away from. And as she reached the end of the path, with sunlight kissing her cheeks and a gentle wind behind her, she whispered the words she once wished someone would say to her. I did everything out of love, but now, I choose myself. And in that moment, with no applause, no spotlight, and no crowd, Linda had the most beautiful kind of ending. Not one where she was celebrated by others, but one where she finally celebrated herself.